The emergency signal cut through every classroom at the Galactic Academy like a knife through silence. Red lights flashed along the crystalline corridors as students from 47 different worlds stopped what they were doing and looked up, in confusion. Alex Thompson closed his quantum mechanics textbook and stood with the rest of his class, wondering what could possibly warrant such a dramatic interruption. Director Veltar's voice boomed through the Academy's communication system. His words translated instantly into hundreds of languages and thought patterns. The massive Altarian's image appeared on every wall screen throughout the complex, his 6 purple eyes gleaming with an authority that had governed this institution for over 3 centuries. All students and faculty will report to the Central Assembly Hall immediately, the director announced. His voice carried a weight that made even the most rebellious students move without question. This concerns the survival of every being currently residing within these walls. Alex followed the stream of diverse alien forms flowing through the corridors toward the assembly hall. Around him, creatures of every imaginable shape and size whispered nervously in their native tongues. The Procyon students twitched their silver ears anxiously, while the crystalline silicoids chimed softly in harmonious concern. Even the usually confident Dracorians looked unsettled, their scales shifting between colors that reflected their emotional state. The Central Assembly Hall could hold 10,000 beings comfortably, and today it was packed to capacity. Alex found himself squeezed between a methane-breathing titan, whose environmental suit hummed quietly, and a graceful Aquarian, whose translucent blue skin pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. The diversity never ceased to amaze him, even after 2 years at the Academy. Director Veltar took the stage with slow, deliberate steps. His towering form cast long shadows across the gathered crowd as silence fell over the massive space. For several long moments, he simply stood there, his multiple eyes scanning the faces before him, as if memorizing each one. "Students of the Galactic Academy," he began, his voice now softer, but somehow more ominous. "For the past 6 months, we have observed a disturbing trend in academic performance and personal development. Despite having access to the most advanced educational technologies in the known galaxy, many of you have shown a marked decline in problem-solving abilities, creativity, and basic survival instincts." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Alex noticed several students exchange worried glances, though he wasn't entirely sure where this was heading. After extensive consultation with the Academy Board and leading experts in xenobiology and cognitive development, Veltar continued, "we have identified the root cause of this decline. The very technology that was meant to free your minds for higher learning has instead made you dependent and weak." The director's image shifted on the screens, showing detailed nutritional analyses and brain scans from various species. The data was complex, but the trend was clear. Students who relied heavily on food duplicator technology showed decreased neural activity in regions associated with creativity and problem-solving. "Effective immediately," Veltar announced, his voice rising to fill every corner of the vast hall. "All food duplicator technology is banned from Academy grounds. Every replicator, synthesizer, and molecular assembler will be deactivated within the next 6 hours." The reaction was instantaneous and dramatic. Thousands of alien voices rose in protest, fear, and confusion. Some students began hyperventilating through whatever respiratory systems they possessed. Others fell to their knees or equivalent appendages in despair. The carefully maintained order of the assembly dissolved into chaos. Alex watched the pandemonium with growing fascination rather than fear. While his classmates panicked about impending starvation, his mind was already working through possibilities. Growing up on Earth, he had spent countless summers with his grandfather in the wilderness of Montana, learning skills that most humans had long forgotten. His grandfather had been a survival instructor for the old military, back when humans still needed to know how to live off the land. "You have been given everything for so long that you have forgotten how to provide for yourselves," Beltar's voice cut through the noise, gradually restoring order. This is not a punishment. This is a necessity. In 3 standard days, all artificial food production will cease. Those who cannot adapt will be transferred to institutions better suited to their current capabilities. A Procyon student near Alex burst into tears, her silver fur standing on end with stress. My people haven't eaten natural food in over 1,000 years, she whispered to her companion. Our digestive systems can't process raw organic matter. Anymore? We'll die. Similar conversations were breaking out all around the hall. The crystalline students worried about finding the specific mineral compounds their bodies required. The energy-based beings fretted about locating compatible food sources. Even the hardy Dracorians looked concerned about their ability to hunt and process prey after millennia of technological dependence. But Alex found himself thinking about the Academy's extensive botanical gardens, the waste processing systems that surely contained organic matter, and the various ecosystems maintained throughout the complex for research purposes. Where others saw impossible obstacles, he saw resources that had been overlooked simply because they weren't needed before. This decision is final, Director Veltar declared as the crowd gradually quieted. The Academy was founded to prepare young minds for the challenges they will face as leaders of their respective civilizations. If you cannot learn to be self-sufficient here, in a controlled environment with abundant resources, how can you be trusted to guide others through genuine crises? The logic was harsh but undeniable. Throughout galactic history, the civilizations that survived and thrived were those that maintained some connection to their fundamental capabilities even as they advanced technologically. Earth had learned this lesson the hard way during several global conflicts. But many other worlds had been fortunate enough to avoid such tests until now. As the assembly began to disperse, Alex noticed that most students were clustering together by species, seeking comfort from their own kind in the face of this unprecedented challenge. The Aquarians formed shimmering pools of shared anxiety, while the Dracorians hissed softly in their ancient tongues. Even the usually solitary silicoids were gathering in harmonic groups, their crystalline forms resonating with shared worry. Alex, however, found himself walking alone toward the botanical gardens. While his fellow students saw the ban as a sentence of suffering or potential death, he saw it as an opportunity to apply knowledge that most galactic citizens had dismissed as primitive and worthless. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory, sharing wisdom that had been passed down through generations of humans who understood that survival was not just about having the right tools, but about knowing how to make do with whatever was available. The next few days would test every student at the Academy in ways they had never imagined. But as Alex studied the unfamiliar plant life through the transparent walls of the gardens, he felt something his classmates did not: confidence. Humanity had never fully abandoned its connection to the natural world, and now that connection might prove to be their greatest strength in a galaxy that had forgotten how to survive without machines. 2 days after the announcement, the Academy's dining halls had transformed into scenes of quiet desperation, where once thousands of students had gathered to enjoy perfectly calibrated meals produced by advanced duplicator technology. Now only scattered groups huddled around tables, sharing whatever processed emergency rations they had managed to collect from their dormitory storage units. Bex pressed her furry palms against her empty stomach and tried not to think about food. The young Procyon had already consumed her last protein supplement 12 hours ago, and her body was beginning to show signs of nutritional stress. Her silver fur had lost its usual luster, and her amber eyes held a hollow quality that worried her friends. "I don't understand how this is supposed to help us learn," she whispered to Kane, the reptilian Dracorian, who sat across from her at their usual table. His scales had shifted to a dull brown color that indicated anxiety and weakness. "My ancestors evolved past the need for primitive feeding methods over a millennium ago. Our digestive systems are specifically adapted for processed nutrients. Kane nodded slowly, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air in a nervous habit that had become more pronounced since the ban took effect. My people were apex predators once, he said quietly, but that was 1500 years ago. We developed replicator technology, so we wouldn't have to kill anymore. Now I wouldn't even know how to hunt if my life depended on it. At the next table, a group of silicoid students chimed in soft, discordant tones that reflected their distress. Yura, their unofficial spokesperson, had already developed visible stress fractures in her crystalline structure. Without the precisely calibrated mineral compounds provided by duplicator technology, her people faced the very real possibility of structural collapse within days. The theoretical knowledge exists in our databases, she explained to anyone who would listen, her voice creating harmonic overtones in the air around her. But practical application is completely different. We need specific ratios of silicon, carbon, and trace metals, processed in exact sequences. One mistake, and our entire molecular matrix could destabilize. Similar conversations were taking place throughout the dining hall, as representatives of dozens of species shared their particular challenges. The Aquarians had managed to maintain their translucent forms by constantly circulating the Academy's artificial pools, but they were slowly weakening without their usual diet of processed algae and synthetic plankton. The methane-breathing titans were perhaps in the worst position of all, as their environmental suits contained only a limited supply of the gas mixtures they needed to survive. Alex Thompson entered the dining hall carrying a simple notebook and observed the scene with a mixture of sympathy and analytical interest. Unlike his alien classmates, he had spent the past 2 days exploring every corner of the Academy's vast complex, cataloging resources and possibilities that others had overlooked or dismissed as irrelevant. The botanical gardens alone contained thousands of plant species from across the galaxy, many of which were not just decorative but potentially nutritious. The Academy's waste processing systems generated organic matter that could be composted and used to cultivate food sources. Even the maintenance areas contained tools and materials that could be repurposed for food preparation and preservation. But, more importantly, Alex possessed something that seemed to be unique among the student body: practical experience with primitive survival techniques, while other civilizations had evolved past the need for such knowledge. Humans had maintained these skills through cultural tradition, recreational activities, and military training programs. He approached his usual table where Bex and Kane sat in dejected silence. Their faces lit up slightly when they saw him, not because he had found a solution to their problems, but simply because he seemed oddly calm and confident, while everyone else struggled with despair. "How are you holding up?" Alex asked as he settled into his chair. Unlike his companions, he showed no signs of nutritional stress or anxiety about the future. "Badly," Bex admitted. "I tried to eat some of the decorative plants from the dormitory lobby yesterday, but they made me sick. My digestive system just isn't designed to process raw organic matter anymore." "What about your people?" Kane asked Alex. "Surely humans have developed some kind of advanced nutritional technology we could adapt for emergency use." Alex smiled and opened his notebook, revealing pages covered with sketches of various plants, detailed notes about soil composition, and what appeared to be crude diagrams of food processing techniques. "Actually, we might be the only species here that never fully gave up the old ways," he said. Both aliens stared at him in confusion. In a galaxy where most civilizations measured their advancement by how far they had progressed beyond basic survival needs, the idea that humans still possessed such primitive knowledge seemed almost impossible to believe. "You mean humans still know how to create food from raw materials?" Bex asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not just know how," Alex replied, turning a page in his notebook to reveal more detailed diagrams. "We never stopped doing it. Even after we developed replicator technology, Many humans continued to grow crops, raise livestock, hunt, fish, and forage as recreational activities. We kept those skills alive because we believed they were important parts of our cultural identity. Cain leaned forward, his reptilian features showing interest for the first time in days. But surely your people must rely primarily on artificial food production now, like every other advanced civilization. Some do, Alex acknowledged. But Earth maintains a strict policy of technological diversity. We never allow ourselves to become completely dependent on any single system, no matter how advanced or reliable it might seem. My grandfather used to say that the most dangerous phrase in any language was "we'll never need that skill again." Around them, other students had begun to notice their conversation. Word spread quickly in the desperate atmosphere of the dining hall that the human student might possess knowledge that could help them survive the crisis. Within minutes, a small crowd had gathered around their table, representing a dozen different species, all facing the same impossible challenge. "Please," Yura said, her crystalline form chiming with urgency. "If you know of any way to sustain ourselves without duplicator technology, many of us will not survive another week." Alex looked at the desperate faces surrounding him and felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. These beings represented some of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Yet they were facing potential starvation simply because they had forgotten the fundamental skills that every species needed to survive. "I can't promise this will work for everyone," he said carefully. "Different species have different nutritional requirements, and what's safe for humans might be dangerous for others. But if you're willing to learn, I can teach you what I know about finding and preparing food from natural sources." The relief that washed over the gathered crowd was almost palpable. For the first time since the ban had been announced, they had reason to hope that survival might be possible. Alex closed his notebook and stood up, already planning the first lesson in what would become the most important education any of them had ever received. The early morning maintenance shift at the Galactic Academy had grown accustomed to unusual sights over the years, but even they paused to stare as Alex Thompson knelt beside a compost processing unit, carefully examining the soil with the intensity of a researcher studying quantum mechanics. His notebook lay open beside him, filled with sketches and observations that would have seemed primitive to most galactic citizens, but represented a form of knowledge that had become invaluable. 3 days had passed since the food ban took effect, and while most students remained in their dormitories, conserving energy and hoping for a reversal of the policy, Alex had spent every waking hour exploring the Academy's vast complex. He had discovered that the institution's designers had inadvertently created a perfect ecosystem for survival-based food production, though none of them had ever intended it to be used for such purposes. The botanical gardens were his primary focus, spanning several levels of the Academy and containing plant species from hundreds of worlds. Most were maintained purely for research and aesthetic purposes, but Alex had identified dozens that could potentially serve as food sources. More importantly, he had found areas where the careful balance of alien horticulture had been disrupted by unintended consequences, creating opportunities that others had overlooked. Behind the main greenhouse complex, where the Academy's waste processing systems converted organic matter into fertilizer for the gardens, Alex had discovered his most valuable resource. A colony of insect-like creatures had established themselves in the nutrient-rich compost, feeding on decomposing plant matter and reproducing at a remarkable rate. They resembled earth crickets in many ways, but were significantly larger and appeared to have adapted to the unique mineral composition of the alien soil. Alex carefully collected several specimens in a makeshift container fashioned from his spare clothing. The creatures were docile and seemed unaware that they were about to become the foundation of a revolutionary approach to nutrition at the Academy. Their chitinous shells contained high levels of protein, and their digestive systems had already processed many of the complex organic compounds found in the alien plant matter, potentially making them safer for consumption by species with sensitive digestive systems. Returning to his dormitory, Alex spread his collected materials across the small preparation area that had been designed for minor food storage and heating. The insects went into one container, while various seeds, leaves, and root segments went into others. His grandfather's lessons echoed in his memory as he began the methodical process of food preparation that humans had refined over thousands of years. The first step was ensuring safety. Alex had spent considerable time researching the biochemistry of each species he had encountered at the academy, cross-referencing their nutritional needs with the potential hazards of his collected materials. What he was attempting had never been tried before, but the basic principles of nutrition remained consistent across biological systems. Using the dormitory's heating elements, Alex began the careful process of drying and processing the insects. The smell was unfamiliar, but not unpleasant, carrying hints of nuts and earth that reminded him of camping trips from his childhood. As they dried, he ground them into a fine powder, using improvised tools created from academy supplies. The plant materials required different treatment. Some needed to be cooked to break down potentially harmful compounds, while others were more nutritious when consumed raw. Alex tested each component carefully, starting with tiny amounts and monitoring his body's reaction before proceeding to larger quantities. Hours passed as he refined his process, gradually developing a mixture that balanced protein content with essential vitamins and minerals. The final product was far from appetizing by the standards of duplicator cuisine, but it represented something that no other student at the academy possessed: a sustainable source of nutrition that could be produced using only natural resources and basic tools. The resulting protein bars were dense, brown, and roughly textured. They tasted like concentrated nature, with flavors that most galactic citizens would find primitive and overwhelming. But Alex's analysis confirmed that they contained more bioavailable nutrients than most duplicator meals, with a nutritional profile that could sustain human physiology indefinitely. More importantly, the basic process could potentially be adapted for other species. The insects could be replaced with different protein sources, and the plant components could be adjusted to meet the specific mineral and vitamin requirements of various alien physiologies. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a beginning. As evening approached, Alex sat in his dormitory consuming one of his experimental protein bars while reviewing his notes. The taste was challenging, but his body responded positively to the concentrated nutrition. More than that, he felt a satisfaction that he had never experienced from duplicator food, a connection to the fundamental processes of life that advanced technology had obscured. A soft knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Bex stood in the corridor, her silver fur now visibly dulled by malnutrition, and her amber eyes holding a desperation that she was trying hard to conceal. "Alex," she said quietly, "I know it's late, but I saw light under your door. I haven't been able to eat anything substantial in 2 days, and I'm starting to feel really weak. Some of the other students are talking about leaving the academy rather than risk starvation." Alex gestured for her to enter and handed her one of his protein bars. "Try this," he said simply. "Start with small bites and chew thoroughly. It's going to taste very different from what you're used to." Bex examined the rough brown bar with curiosity and apprehension. Her sensitive nose detected unfamiliar scents that her civilized mind wanted to reject, but her desperate hunger overcame her cultural conditioning. The first bite made her whiskers twitch in surprise, but she continued chewing slowly. "This is actually edible," she said with amazement. "It tastes strange, but my body is already responding to it." "What is this made from?" "Protein from insects and nutrients from various plants," Alex explained matter-of-factly. "Both sources that the Academy has in abundance, but that nobody else thought to use as food." Bex stared at him with something approaching awe. You made this from bugs and weeds, among other things? Alex nodded. The insects are actually more nutritious than most synthetic proteins, and the plants provide essential vitamins and minerals that your body needs to function properly. It's not gourmet cuisine, but it will keep you alive and healthy. As Bex continued eating, Alex could see the immediate effects on her physiology. Her fur began to regain some of its natural luster, and her eyes brightened with renewed energy. The desperate edge that had characterized her behavior for the past several days gradually faded as her body received the nutrition it desperately needed. "How did you learn to do this?" she asked between bites. "My grandfather taught me when I was young," Alex replied. "Humans have always maintained these skills, even after we developed advanced technology. We learned a long time ago that the most sophisticated tools can fail when you need them most, but knowledge and adaptability are always available if you keep them sharp." Bex finished the protein bar and sat quietly for several minutes, allowing her body to process the unfamiliar but welcome nutrition. "Could you teach others to make these?" she finally asked. Alex looked at his notebook, filled with observations and techniques that represented thousands of years of human survival knowledge. "I think it's time to find out," he said. Word traveled through the Academy's communication networks faster than a supernova shockwave. By dawn of the fourth day since the duplicator ban, a crowd of desperate students had gathered outside Alex Thompson's dormitory, their various forms creating a bizarre but touching display of interspecies cooperation, born from shared necessity. Alex opened his door to find representatives from nearly every major civilization enrolled at the Academy. Yura's crystalline form chimed softly with hope, while Kane's reptilian scales had shifted to colors indicating cautious optimism. Behind them stood dozens of others, aquatic beings in portable habitat suits, energy entities maintaining barely stable forms, and countless humanoid species whose advanced civilizations had never prepared them for such a fundamental challenge. "Please," Yura spoke for the group, her harmonic voice creating resonant frequencies in the corridor walls. "Bex told us what you accomplished yesterday. My people will offer any technology, any knowledge in exchange for your nutritional techniques." Alex stepped back to allow the crowd to see into his dormitory, where several more protein bars sat. On his small preparation counter, alongside his notebook filled with survival techniques, the sight of actual, edible food created a palpable wave of hope among the gathered students. "I don't want your technology," Alex said quietly, causing surprised murmurs throughout the crowd. "I want to teach you how to be statistician. These techniques aren't secrets to be traded. They're skills that every living being should possess." Within an hour, Alex found himself leading an impromptu expedition through the Academy's botanical gardens. The diverse group followed him with the intensity of disciples seeking enlightenment, though what they were actually seeking was far more basic: the knowledge of how to sustain their own lives without depending on machines. The first lesson began with plant identification. Alex moved slowly through the gardens, pointing out species that were safe for consumption and explaining how to recognize the visual and chemical markers that indicated nutritional value. His alien students struggled with concepts that seemed primitive by their standards, but their desperation drove them to pay attention with academic rigor. "This plant here produces seeds that are high in essential fatty acids," Alex explained, kneeling beside a flowering shrub that the Academy's designers had chosen purely for its aesthetic appeal. "The leaves can be processed to extract vitamins that most of your species require, and the root system contains minerals that will help Yura maintain her crystalline structure." Yura extended one of her appendages to carefully touch the plant, her form resonating with interest. "The molecular composition does contain silicon-carbon compounds, similar to what my people need," she confirmed. "But how do we extract and process them without industrial equipment?" Alex smiled and pulled out several simple tools he had fashioned from Academy supplies: containers for collecting, makeshift grinding implements, and basic heating elements that could be powered by the dormitories. Energy systems. The same way humans have been doing it for thousands of years. With patience, observation, and the willingness to learn from trial and error. The insect harvesting proved more challenging for his alien students. When Alex led them to the compost area behind the greenhouse complex, several species had immediate negative reactions to the sight and smell of the thriving insect colony. Bex's whiskers twitched with revulsion, while Kane's predatory instincts triggered inappropriately, causing him to pounce on a startled Aquarian student instead of the intended protein source. "I understand this seems primitive and disturbing," Alex said patiently, as he demonstrated proper collection techniques. "But these creatures represent one of the most efficient protein sources available to us. They've already processed the complex organic compounds from the plant matter, making them safer and more nutritious than many synthetic alternatives." Gradually, understanding began to dawn among his students. These weren't barbaric practices, but sophisticated techniques for converting available resources into bioavailable nutrition. The methods required knowledge of biochemistry, understanding of species-specific nutritional needs, and careful attention to safety protocols that were actually more rigorous than many technological processes. Over the following days, Alex's informal survival school grew exponentially. Students who had successfully learned the basic techniques became teachers themselves, spreading the knowledge throughout their dormitory sectors and cultural groups. The Academy's botanical gardens transformed from decorative spaces into bustling centers of agricultural activity. As different species adapted the fundamental principles to their unique physiological requirements, the Dracorians developed techniques for processing larger prey animals that they discovered in the Academy's ecosystem simulation areas. Their hunting instincts, dormant for centuries, gradually awakened under Alex's guidance, though he had to teach them modern ethical approaches to sustainable harvesting rather than the wasteful practices of their ancient ancestors. The found ways to extract and concentrate the mineral compounds they needed from various crystalline plants, creating nutritional supplements that were actually superior to their previous duplicator-based diet. Yura became one of the most successful students, developing innovative techniques for mineral processing that other crystalline species quickly adopted. Even the energy-based beings found solutions, learning to cultivate photosynthetic organisms that could convert the Academy's artificial lighting into forms of nutrition their species could absorb. Their success required Alex to research principles of photonic biology that were far beyond his original knowledge, but his human adaptability allowed him to learn alongside his students. The transformation was remarkable, not just in terms of nutrition but in overall student behavior and academic performance. As they reconnected with fundamental survival skills, their minds seemed to sharpen and their creativity increased. Problem-solving abilities that had atrophied during years of technological dependence began to recover and strengthen. Director Veltar observed these changes with growing interest. Hidden cameras throughout the Academy recorded the unprecedented cooperation between species that had historically maintained strict cultural boundaries. Students who had previously socialized only with their own kind were now working together, sharing knowledge and resources in ways that the Academy's formal curriculum had never achieved. The most remarkable change was in their relationship with their environment. Students who had previously seen the Academy as a sterile educational facility now understood it as a living ecosystem that could support them if they possessed the knowledge and skills to work with it, rather than simply consume its resources through technological intermediaries. Alex found himself at the center of this transformation, but he was careful to emphasize that he was not the source of the revolution. "These aren't human techniques," he explained to a group of advanced students who had mastered the basic survival skills. "These are universal principles that every biological species discovers eventually. Humans just happen to maintain them when most others moved beyond them." The protein bars that had started as a desperate experiment became symbols of something larger. The recognition that true advancement meant maintaining essential capabilities even while developing sophisticated technologies. Students began carrying them not just as emergency food, but as reminders of their own capacity for self-reliance and adaptation. As word of the Academy's transformation spread beyond its walls, representatives from various galactic governments began making discreet inquiries about implementing similar programs in their own educational institutions. The human approach to technological development, which had always seemed backward to more advanced civilizations, was suddenly being recognized as a form of wisdom that could enhance rather than compete with high technology. Alex stood in the botanical gardens one evening, watching groups of students from dozens of species working together to harvest and process their daily nutrition. The sight would have been unimaginable just weeks earlier, but now it seemed as natural as the growth of the plants themselves. The revolution had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, transforming not just how the students ate, but how they understood their relationship with the universe around them. The emergency session of the Galactic Academy Board convened exactly 6 weeks after Director Veltar had announced the food duplicator ban. Representatives from 47 major civilizations materialized in the council chamber through various forms of transportation and communication technology, each expecting to hear reports of educational failure, student casualties, and the inevitable reversal of what many had privately considered a disastrous policy decision. Council Administrator Zethrin of the Centauri Union activated the holographic displays that would present the data collected during the experimental period. Her normally composed features showed signs of confusion as she reviewed the preliminary reports that had been streaming in from Academy monitoring systems over the past several days. Honored representatives, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation matrices that allowed dozens of species to participate in the proceedings. The data we have collected during this period presents results that none of our predictive models anticipated. The holographic displays showed comparative analyses of student health, academic performance, and psychological stability from before and after the duplicator ban, rather than the expected decline that had prompted many council members to prepare emergency intervention protocols. Every metric showed significant improvement. Director Veltar rose from his position at the center of the chamber, his 6 eyes gleaming with something that resembled satisfaction. Physical health indices have improved by an average of 37% across all species, he reported. Cognitive function tests show increases in problem-solving ability, creativity, and adaptive thinking that exceed anything we have recorded in the Academy's history. Councillor Thekmer of the High Court leaned forward, his ancient reptilian features creased with skepticism. These improvements could not possibly result from nutritional changes alone, he stated. What other factors are you failing to report? The nutritional changes were merely the catalyst, Veltar explained. When students were forced to take responsibility for their own survival, they rediscovered capabilities that had been dormant for generations. They learned to observe their environment, to cooperate across species boundaries, and to solve problems using available resources rather than depending on technological solutions. The holographic displays shifted to show scenes from throughout the Academy, students from different worlds working together in the botanical gardens, sharing knowledge and techniques that their respective civilizations had abandoned centuries ago. The images were unprecedented in their display of interspecies cooperation and practical problem-solving. This transformation was initiated by a single student, Veltar continued, a human named Alex Thompson, who possessed knowledge that every other species at the Academy had dismissed as primitive and irrelevant. The council chamber buzzed with translated discussions as representatives considered the implications. The human delegation, which had been expecting to defend their species' seemingly backward approach to technological development, found themselves suddenly elevated to unexpected prominence. Ambassador Chen of the Earth Council stood to address the assembly. Humans have always maintained what we call technological diversity, she explained. We never allow ourselves to become completely dependent on any single system. no matter how advanced it might appear. This policy has been criticized by many as evidence of our species' inability to fully embrace progress. Yet this apparent limitation proved to be a crucial strength, Veltar added. When advanced systems failed or were removed, the human student was able to adapt because his people had never abandoned the fundamental skills that all technological systems are ultimately built upon. The holographic displays showed detailed recordings of Alex's teaching sessions with alien students, demonstrating techniques for food identification, processing, and preparation that had been unknown to most galactic civilizations for millennia. The footage revealed not primitive barbarism, but sophisticated knowledge systems that required deep understanding of biology, chemistry, and ecology. The human approach appears to involve maintaining multiple parallel systems, observed Counselor Yextel of the Silicon Confederation. Rather than replacing older capabilities with newer ones, they preserve both as complementary approaches to problem solving. Exactly, Ambassador Chen confirmed. We learned through historical experience that the most advanced technologies can fail when they are most needed. By maintaining traditional skills alongside modern capabilities, we ensure that our civilization remains adaptable, regardless of circumstances. The council session continued for several hours, as representatives grappled with the implications of the Academy's transformation. Several civilizations had already begun implementing similar programs in their own educational institutions, while others struggled to understand how supposedly primitive techniques could enhance, rather than compete with advanced technology. Director Veltar presented additional data showing that students who had learned the survival techniques continued to excel in their advanced coursework, applying the problem-solving approaches they had developed to complex theoretical challenges in mathematics, physics, and xeno. The connection between fundamental capabilities and advanced thinking had proven stronger than anyone had anticipated. The human student demonstrated something that we had forgotten, Veltar concluded. True advancement is not about replacing fundamental capabilities with technological alternatives, but about building sophisticated systems upon a foundation of basic competence. A civilization that cannot survive without its machines has not transcended primitive limitations, but has, instead, become enslaved by them. Meanwhile, Alex Thompson sat in the Academy's observation deck, sharing a meal of homemade protein bars with a diverse group of friends who had become his closest companions during the crisis. Through the vast transparisteel windows, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, unchanged by the technological marvels that had risen and fallen beneath their light. Your people have given us something invaluable, Bex said, carefully savoring one of her own attempts at creating insect-based nutrition bars. Her technique had improved considerably over the weeks, and she now took pride in her ability to sustain herself without technological assistance. We haven't given you anything, Alex replied thoughtfully. We just reminded you of what you already possessed but had forgotten how to access. Yura's crystalline form chimed softly in agreement. The knowledge was always there, she acknowledged. We simply convinced ourselves that we had evolved beyond the need for it. The conversation was interrupted by an announcement from Director Veltar, informing the student body that the Academy's experiment had been deemed successful and that the survival skills curriculum would be permanently integrated into the standard educational program. Food duplicators would be gradually reintroduced, but students would be required to demonstrate competence in natural resource utilization before being permitted to use them. Things are going to be different now, Kane observed, his scales shifting, two colors that indicated contentment and confidence, not just here at the Academy, but throughout the galaxy. Alex nodded, thinking about the reports he had been receiving from his family on Earth. Human survival instructors were suddenly in demand throughout known space as civilizations sought to relearn the skills they had abandoned in their rush toward technological advancement. What had once been seen as humanity's greatest weakness was now recognized as their most valuable contribution to galactic civilization. The Academy's motto has always been knowledge illuminates the path forward, Alex said, pointing to the inscription visible through the observation deck's windows. But sometimes the path forward leads back to wisdom that was never really lost, just temporarily forgotten. The protein bars they shared represented more than emergency nutrition or primitive food preparation techniques. They had become symbols of resilience, adaptability, and the recognition that true strength came not from dependence on sophisticated tools, but from the ability to thrive, regardless of circumstances, as the stars continued their eternal dance. Beyond the Academy's walls, Alex reflected on the unexpected turn his education had taken. He had come to learn about advanced galactic civilizations and cutting-edge technologies, but instead had discovered that the most valuable knowledge he possessed was what his grandfather had taught him. During long summer afternoons in the Montana wilderness, the revolution that had transformed the Galactic Academy would ripple outward through space and time, changing how entire civilizations approached the relationship between technology and survival. And at its center was a simple truth that humans had never forgotten. The most advanced beings in the universe were not those with the most sophisticated machines, but those who could thrive with or without them.